Hey everybody, Mr. Schultz here. We're going to get started on the first set of notes from Unit 8 or Module 8. Um, I'll jump right into it. Shrink myself down here a little bit and get going. All right, so the focus for this week is going to be on crime scene sketching. Usually, I jump into crime scene photography first, but since we're distance right now and um, it's probably easier for us to focus on crime scene sketching for this point in time, and then hopefully maybe if we're back on campus we'll have access to the cameras and stuff and we can do crime scene photography a little bit later. So I'm going to push that back a little bit. So crime scene sketching, our learning objectives this week is to recognize and implement appropriate measurement techniques. You're going to have to do that. Utilize note-taking techniques. I consider crime scene sketching as part of note-taking, and then implement sketching and diagramming techniques as well. So that's the learning objectives. You can see those again on Canvas, and I will also kind of go over with you what the next assignment is. A little bit longer instructions on Canvas, but this will be due next Wednesday. So this gives us a little more than or a little less than a week. But you're going to be creating a detailed rough sketch of a crime scene at your house, and we're basically going to use the same scene that you did the simulation of securing the crime scene with, except now you're going to make a sketch of that scene, which means you're going to have to get access to a tape measure or some other measuring device and actually make measurements of the layout of the house, and then we're going to have to plant some evidence and stuff like that. You don't have to actually plant the evidence, you just have to have it included on your sketch. So you got to say, okay, there was a fingerprint here, or there was a a weapon there, or whatever you happen to find, a footprint, something. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about the assignment in class. So let's go ahead and get moving. So what is a crime scene sketch? A crime scene sketch is an invaluable aid in recording the investigative data, right? It's a permanent record that provides supplemental information that is not easily accomplished with exclusive use of just crime scene photography or notes. A crime scene sketch basically depicts the overall layout of the location and the relationship of all the evidentiary items to the surroundings. It can help show the path a suspect or victim took during and the distance that was involved, or it can help us kind of do some crime scene reconstruction. It can be used when questioning suspects and witnesses. During the trial, the crime scene diagram correlates testimony of witnesses, and it also serves as a tool for relaying uh, reference and orientation points to the prosecutor, judge, jury, and all those involved. So it's really an important part of documenting the scene. Okay. You have a couple of different types of sketches we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the rough sketch and finished sketch. We're going to work on the rough sketch this week, and then later on we're going to actually do a finished sketch for this. Now, again, since we're doing this distance learning, right? We're learning at a distance here. The finished sketch is going to be a little bit more difficult because we're going to have to do that by hand, which is kind of old school. In the past, usually what I do is I get software. Basically, it's crime scene reconstruction software that you can actually do finished sketches on the computers. And if we were on campus, that's probably what we'd do. We'd do our rough sketch by hand, and then we would take that information in the measurements and sit in the computer and start working on a finished sketch for a little while too. So the rough sketch is the original sketch that's drafted at the scene. Um, Usually it's hand drawn with pencil and simple drawing tools on blank paper or graph paper. Then the finished sketch is a rough sketch it's basically sketched from the rough sketch, and it's got to be basically professional level sketching, right? It's a sketch that's going to be attached to the crime scene report and could be used in court, so it's got to be top notch. Um, and usually this is done nowadays using CAD, computer aided design, or software that can help you do this. There's really actually some really cool new innovative techniques that I'm going to show you on the last slide here of some of the different coming of age technologies that actually almost mind-boggling in what they can accomplish. And I'll show you kind of what I mean when we get to that last slide. All right. So how is the scene sketch? Before beginning the sketch, obtain a comprehensive view of the scene. So usually you're going to do your walkthrough. You've kind of identified all the major pieces of evidence. You got to kind of determine the sketch limits, decide what to include, what to exclude. If the scene is really complicated, sometimes you're going to have more than one sketch, right? You might have a number of sketches to help you with the documentation of the scene. So just kind of keep in mind that, we're doing one sketch, but you may end up having more if it's a very complicated scene. You have secondary scenes and things like that going on. So what are the general components of a sketch? All right, the things that you need to have on your sketch. One thing is you need to have the orientation, right? So you have to have that north arrow somewhere on the sketch showing the orientation, which direction we're facing. The sketch should also be marked not to scale unless you're actually using a scale. Now, using a scale is usually not recommended because um, defense or attorneys, opposing counsel could have a field day with that. If they find out, your quarter inch equals a foot is off by a little bit in one spot because you mismeasured, well, they are going to have a field day with that. So usually, most of these crime scene sketches, you want to put not to scale. Even if you're using a scale, sometimes you want to put not to scale on the sketch so that they know that these are approximations and they you can't take them too literal. A title block indicating the case title, location, dates, who prepared the sketch should be included as well. And then all your measurements. Overall measurements of the room space should be provided. Important features such as doors, windows, furnishings should also be measured in relationship to room features. Evidence items need to be measured from 2 fixed reference points. And we're going to talk about different ways we can do that. Measurements need to be made in a straight line. If using tape measures, they need to be held taut and at the same plane that it's being measured. So if you're measuring something straight across, you don't want to, have one side of the tape measure way up here and the other side way down here because it's going to actually increase the length and you won't have an accurate measurement. So, make sure they're on the same plane and that tape measure is pulled tight. If we're on campus, let me see, I'll have to find it, but if we were on campus, we would be doing this using basically digital tape measures. They're like little lasers that you shoot at the wall. It shoots a laser, bounces back, and it tells you exactly how far away it is. Much easier. All right, so there's a few different types of sketches. The main ones that you should be familiar with are something called an overview, or sometimes called a bird's eye view or a plan view, elevation sketch, and then an exploded view, and then also perspective sketch. And we're going to go over each one of them, and I'll show you some examples. So let's start, and I'm going to move myself over here because I think it's going to be better to be over here for these. We'll start with the bird's eye view or the overview, right? This consists of a bird's eye view of the floor plan sketch of a scene. This is the most common type of sketch that you're going to see. And it consists of all the items on a horizontal plane. So if you're taking a look at this, you can see that this is showing a window. It's showing you the location of doors. It's showing you, furnishings and stuff like that. And then bodies, blood, etc. Different things that might be around, okay? So this is a floor plan view or overview or bird's eye view. And this is probably the one we're going to be most familiar with, and it's the one we use the most. You also have elevation sketches. Now, elevation sketches, and I'm going to again move myself so I'm a little bit better position. Elevation sketches are basically portraying vertical planes rather than horizontal planes. Examples of this could be bloodstain patterns on vertical surfaces like walls, or the cabinetry on the walls, or bullet holes through windows or walls. This is an elevation sketch showing kind of how we're starting from the water and moving up in elevation. It's showing the side of the house and the different spots where we might have drops of blood. This could be an elevation sketch. Sometimes this could also be called a perspective sketch. But you're showing a wall and it's showing different locations of where bullet holes were and the cabinets that are on the wall and stuff like that. A lot of times an elevation sketch might not be three-dimensional. That's why I said this could be a perspective sketch as well. Sometimes it might just show the wall, one wall, so it's just a flat square. It's a little bit more like the floor plan view, but it's showing a wall instead of the actual floor. All right. Then we have the exploded view. This is kind of a combination of the first two sketches. It's going to show the walls and the floor plan, except here the floor plan, right? This is the floor here, this middle square. And then what happens is we drop the walls down. So basically it shows the walls kind of flattened out, right? So this would be a wall over here. This would be a wall with a window on it. This would be a wall over here with the door. And this would be another wall over here. So it's showing the floor plan and the walls at the same time. And then we also have the perspective sketch. This is usually kind of a three-dimensional type sketch. And this could be of objects or it could be of the scene itself. So this is showing, what a car looked like, for example, in a perspective sketch. Here's a close-up showing blood spatter on a gun barrel as a perspective sketch. It's probably one of the most difficult sketches to create. It does require some skill. Although some of these perspective sketches can now be done with some of this new software we're going to talk about later. All right, so what equipment do you need to make a sketch? You need a supply of writing implements. Pencils may be used for overall sketch. The sketcher could choose to use red pencils, for example, to denote blood stains. They can use highlighters or other colored pencils to mark different types of evidence on the sketch. Preserve a pencil-created sketch in permanent manner as soon as possible because they can get smudged. So one of the easy ways of doing that is if you have a sketch, simply make a photocopy of the finished sketch and include that photocopy with the original. You'll need blank paper or graph paper. While it's not essential, it does simplify some of the scale drawing. Drawing surfaces such as a clipboard or a desk or some other surface that you can draw on. If you're at the scene doing your rough sketch, you're going to want to have something mobile so you can kind of sketch while you're moving around and taking measurements. Measuring device, tape measures are the most common tool used and should be at least 50 to 100 feet. Other measuring devices may include surveyor's wheel for longer distances, or a laser rangefinder, or a total station or GPS coordinates can be also useful for outdoor scenes. Rulers for drawing straight lines, drawing to scale, or even making short measurements, and then a magnetic compass to determine true north. So what's the steps in creating this sketch? If the scene's large, make a very rough sketch of the area while obtaining an overview of the scene. This initial rough sketch serves as a reference when making more completed sketches later on. Enlarged sections of this rough sketch can be made as separate drawings in order to bring out greater detail. Begin taking measurements and laying out a rough sketch. Lay down a baseline. This is usually consists of a long uninterrupted side of the room, or if outdoors, it could be a curved line or a building line, or it could even be an imaginary line between two fixed points, but make sure they're fixed. Take other measurements of the periphery of the scene and add them to the baseline. And then having established the outer boundaries of the sketch, add various objects in their proper positions. The items of evidence and furnishings and things like that that might be around. And then start making measurements. Write them down. Measurements can be recorded directly on the sketch or in a chart. Long distances may be measured with an odometer on an automobile. Critical measurements should be checked by two people. Now, one thing I will say, and when you're making these measurements, if there's lots and lots and lots of evidence, if it's a very complicated scene, then you might want to actually, instead of putting them directly on the sketch, use the chart method that we talked about. All right, so how are these scene measurements made? And we're going to kind of go into a couple of options for this, all right? So measurements are taken to identify general scene dimensions in specific locations of evidence where the crime occurred. A standard tape measure or an electronic laser tape measure could be used. Evidence measurements are generally made to the nearest quarter inch. If a greater degree of precision is required, then you can basically use smaller units of measurement. You could even do it into the metric system and start measuring in centimeters and millimeters. In documenting close-up photographs of bloodstain patterns and bullet defects, the most precise unit of measurement available should be photographically depicted. These measurements are generally represented by a metric scale with millimeters and dimensions. Measurements to the evidence may be taken to the center of mass of the evidence if spatial orientation does not matter. However, if spatial orientation does matter, then you're going to probably want to take it to two different points. An example of the center of mass would be measuring to the center of a strand of hair because it's very small on a carpet, or an ejected bullet casing, which is going to be rather short. At least two separate sets of measurements from two different points on a various pieces of evidence may be taken if spatial orientation is important. An example would be measuring both the handle and the tip of a blade of a knife, or from the front sight to the rear sight on a particular handgun. So we want to know which way that handgun's facing. Okay. Permanent features such as of areas such as walls, doors, openings, or room corners are the primary reference points. Additional reference points can be established on such features as, different pieces of the room, or a corner of the room, or maybe permanent pieces of furniture like a countertop or something like that. Reference points are usually designated as an uppercase R followed by a number. So you got reference point 1, reference point 2, reference point 3. If there are very few items of evidence, the measurements may be depicted on the primary sketch with straight lines and the measurements represented beside them. So you can put the measurements directly on there. If you have lots of pieces of evidence, you may want to go with a supplemental page. So representing all measurements on the primary sketch very quickly becomes confusing and difficult to decipher. So a table may be prepared on the sketch, or a supplemental page that shows the distances between fixed points. An alternative is to create an additional sketch that depicts only one evidence measurement. All right, so let's look at how this is done, and let's kind of try to break this down the best we can. So you have three methods. There's actually another method, but it's not used very much. I'll mention it, but we'll look at the three that's used normally. You have rectangular coordinates. All points require two measurements for a two-dimensional sketch. And then you would need a third measurement if you're doing a perspective sketch, like a three-dimensional sketch. So rectangular coordinates, basically an object is located by making the measurement at right angles of each of the two walls. This works well for indoor measurements, right? So if you have, for example, a handgun here and you want to find out where it's located in the room, you would make a measurement from one wall, 5 feet 3 inches, and then another wall, 5 feet 4 inches, and you would get an idea of where that gun is. Now, if they're using center of mass, they're going to about the middle of the gun. If it was important to determine which way that gun was facing, then you might make a measurement to the tip of the barrel, and then to the back sight and the back sight. And it might be, it'll give you a little bit better orientation. You could also have baseline measurements. Baseline measurements are good for outside, right? This is basically a transecting baseline, particularly useful in large, irregularly shaped outdoor areas. They transect the crime scene by laying down a tape measure along some convenient line so it crosses the entire area. And then they can locate this line in the diagram from fixed points on the scene, and then locate objects in the crime scene by measuring their distance from the established baseline. Measurements may be taken at right angles to the tape. And then you record how far along the baseline the distance out to the object was measured. This provides two measurements needed to locate the object. So in other words, in this baseline, they have a victim that's on a dock. It looks like this is probably a irregularly shaped coastline. You have a tree over here, tree over here. We would lay down the baseline between the two trees. Those are fixed points, right? And then what you can do is you can say, okay, we want to find out where object 1 is. We can measure the distance from point A and then the distance off the baseline and get an exact location of the first object. And then we could do the same thing for object 2 and the same thing for object 3. Okay. Now notice these are going this way, right? This one's going this way. So you got to have some directionality too. You got to say, object 3 is 10 feet from point A and 3 feet south or something like that, okay? And then you also have triangulation. Triangulation commonly used to fix furnishings and items of evidence on any surface. Measurements are taken from 2 fixed points to the item of evidence. The distance between the 2 fixed points must be known. It is critical that fixed points be just that. They cannot be movable. Examples are corners of rooms or the edges of a door or window opening. In this case, they have a stone pier that's not going to move in the corner of like a bait store. And what they can do is they can say, okay, well, we don't have anywhere where we can set up a nice straight baseline somewhere. So what they can do is they can say from the corner of this stone pier, and now you got to have directionality, it's 195 feet at 65 degrees. And then from the corner of the bait store, it's 200 feet at 300 degrees. Okay, so you got to have some of this directionality, and that kind of leads us into that fourth one I mentioned. You actually have coordinates that you can use. You can have a central point, and then you can measure everything away from that central point as well, central fixed point. But that's not usually used. Usually, you're going to use some kind of triangulation or rectangular coordinates or a baseline. All right, let me move myself out of the way again. So how is a sketch illustrated? Do not attempt to draw an object as it appears. Use symbols instead. Now the cool thing is on a lot of the software that they have, now you got basically you can click on a variety of symbols and make them look a little bit more similar. But don't sit there and try to draw the handgun. Instead, use a symbol. And sometimes it could be as simple as a number or a letter, right? So use lettered or numbered squares, circles, figures, or points to represent various objects in the sketch. So even if I went back, let's see if I can go back here. Go back to some of these, they just have simply a dot and a number, okay? Or in this case, they actually have the gun drawn, but it's actually a computer rendering. So if you use computer software, you might be able to get something a little bit more specific. In this case, the symbol X is representing the victim. They didn't actually draw a body. But if you use computer software, that'll actually have a body, and you can actually move the body into the shape of how you found them, position their arms and legs exactly how you found them. So that's fine for the finished sketch if you're using software, but for the rough sketch, it's better to just say, okay, X is where the victim was, object 1 was where the gun was, object 2 was a shell casing, etc. If photography markers are used, ensure they correspond to the same objects in the sketch. For example, if photo marker number 5 is used to mark the handgun, make sure that the handgun in the sketch is labeled number 5. So you just kind of correlate those. That way when they're looking through the photographs with the evidence marker 5, you're going to know evidence marker 5, which was this gun, was at this position, and they can look at the sketch and see exactly where it was. Label all doors and windows. Show the direction, for example, that the doors open with a curved line. And again, I can go backwards here. We'll go backwards to here. Whoops, sorry, I went too fast. So this is showing the door. This shows this curved line shows that the door opens to the inside of this room. Okay. And then use an arrow to show the direction of stairways. Use jagged lines to cut off unnecessary height or length in your drawing. So if you're not showing the whole length, you can just kind of make this jagged line. And it says, hey, we're not showing it all. It's not to scale. So the following should be recorded on the sketch. Make sure you have the following: the address or location of the scene, the case number, date that the sketch was made, and who made the sketch. A key to identify the different objects in the sketch. An arrow showing the direction north, and then the scale that you're using, or in most cases, you're going to write not to scale. So this kind of takes us to what we do with these finished sketches. There are several CAD-based programs that are commercially available and can be used to create professional and accurate crime scene diagrams. These type of programs can be used at the scene to record the measurements and generate sketches, or used at the office using rough sketches. Usually people make the rough sketch, pencil paper, and then they take that rough sketch with all their measurements and they can go back and actually do a computer designed final sketch. Okay, but let's take it into the cutting edge stuff. So the latest technology, and this would be really cool if we could ever get our hands on one, but they're super expensive. But this is a portable device that now exists that can perform 360 degree scan of the crime scene in as little as 20 minutes, capturing millions of measurements of all objects visible to the scanner. Dozens of high resolution images are captured automatically, and the device requires only the space needed by a standard photographer's tripod. The data generated can be used to find the distance between any 2 points at the scene, to view the scene from any vantage point, including directly overhead, and to create a full color 3D model for investigative and courtroom purposes. So, this is one of those, and I'm going to click on it real quick so you guys can just see. But it's CSI 360. This is incredible. I mean, some of the stuff that they can do with this is they can set it up and they can actually um, do these different scans. Let's just do one of these. Let's go. We'll do this Ashton Elementary. So you click on this, and this the cool thing is you can actually. I mean, this is done by this software. You get a 360-degree view of everything in here, and you want to move to the next spot. You click the next spot, and it takes you into there, and now you got another 360-degree view. So this is pretty cool, high-tech stuff that is very kind of cutting edge, and you can do all this cool things with it, and it basically makes sketching a breeze, right? So you can do all these different things. You can go to different locations in the thing. Now you would have to in each one of these rooms, obviously set this up and do a scan, right? So you go into this closet, you'd have to set it up, and then 20 minutes later, you basically have every measurement in this room along with photos. So really cool stuff that they're perfectly capable of doing now, and it would be pretty neat to get our hands on some of that technology, but it is very expensive. Maybe one day in the future the price will come down and we'll be able to kind of do that. So that's it. That's crime scene sketching. We're going to go with the old-fashioned hand, pencil, paper method for a little while, and then hopefully maybe get some computer software at the very least to do our finished sketches, which is pretty cool too. All right, guys, have a good day.